All right, y'all. We back in here, and have Chelsea done enough to challenge for the Premier League title? Is the title of this video. And so I wanted to go in and review the summer transfer window for the club, as well as the outlook that we have for this season, and whether Chelsea can truly challenge for that title and push up for that championship place. So getting into it, I think the answer, before I get into the incomings and outgoings of the club, the answer talent-wise is yes, in my opinion. The talent is there to challenge. Now, that doesn't take into account the age and experience of the squad, as well as the manager, Enzo Maresca himself. I think while the talent is there, where the club will struggle throughout the season is probably in its consistency of performances to try to keep up with the likes of Liverpool and Arsenal. Manchester City, we'll see if they can get back to where they were a few seasons ago, but it's not looking good for them so far, even though I predicted them to win the title. But in any case, yeah, you see a team like Liverpool in the first three matches, they didn't play well in each of the first three and still came out coming into the international break at 9 points with a win in each of those games. And, Chelsea, that first performance against Palace this season showed that there's still a little bit of work to do. I know it was the first match of the season, but there's probably still a little work to do in terms of pulling away from teams, and even when not performing well, finding a way to get the victory. Obviously, getting into the incomings, it looks like that the talent is there to do so. The three, attacking incomings, particularly the key signings of the summer, Joao Pedro, Liam Delap, and then Estevao coming in after, committing to a move about a year or two ago. I think those three have the potential to really grow and develop as players, obviously. Liam Delap being injured, obviously there's a setback there for him, but Joao Pedro and Estevao, they've already looked like they belong in the first 11. Joao Pedro specifically, he's up for Premier League Player of the Month, and he smashed it through the first few games. And, Estevao's looked bright. He probably should have a couple goals already and is already on an assist in that West Ham game. So it's looking really good in terms of that. Liam Delap, obviously, as I said, injured for a few months, and we'll get into that, the shenanigans that caused with the likes of Nico Jackson and Marquee. But it's a shame for him because not only do the club really need him, obviously, now they're down to one true striker before recalling Marquee, but he had the chance to come in and really make an impact. We saw he came off the bench in the first match of the season, and then against West Ham started, and even though he did not score a goal, he did a really good job of holding the ball up, laying it off to players who could then drive into attacking areas. His movement is really good. His ball striking ability is incredible. So, hopefully when he is able to get healthy again in a couple months, it looks like he can come in and really make an impact. And actually, it might be a boost to the club because it'll almost be like a new signing again when he comes in to the fold. In terms of the other incomings that the club had that are a part of the first team squad for Chelsea this season, Dario Sugo, Jamie Gittins, Joao Hato, Alejandro Garnacho, and Facundo Buenanote, I believe is how you pronounce it, from Brighton, which is a bit of a particular signing. I'll get into that in a second. But, what those signings represent is better balance in the squad, I would have to say. All of those players can come in and compete and provide cover and even start, maybe even break into the first 11 at times. Buenanote specifically, he was not included in the Champions League squad, which is a shame for him. He's brought in on loan, and it looks like it's a dry loan, which is a little bit weird. I think Chelsea have the right of first refusal in terms of incoming bids next summer. But it looks like he's just provided depth for, domestic cup runs or lower Premier League, lower in the table Premier League matches. So we'll see about him. But, the sporting directors have made it very clear since they've changed strategy when they first came in under after the Champions League, triumph by the club. at first it was signings like Raheem Sterling, Koulibaly, and the likes of Lukaku, and those signings were on big wages, bigger fees that were never going to be recouped in the same way. We still see Raheem Sterling at the club, still collecting wages, and it's clear that the change in strategy from the sporting director since they came in is viewed in a more long-term way in terms of buying younger players for resale value. And as a result, it's a little weird because, they had the big money Caicedo and Enzo Fernandez signings for 100 mil plus. And typically when a world-class player like Alexander Isak is available for transfer in the Premier League and is looking to move to another Premier League club, I would like to think that Chelsea would be in for a player like that, especially one who is as young as Isak. He's not as old as Romelu Lukaku was when 100 mil was spent on him. But it's clear that if that player is not going to potentially represent resale value in the future, that it's just not in the cards for the club. Now, that may not always be the case. And there were other opportunities like Liam Delap and Estevao and Joao Pedro. So it's not as if it was, oh, you're going for Isak and there aren't really other talented players available. No, that's not the case. So we'll see how that proves to shape our season this season specifically. But, I have really no complaints about the incomings. In terms of the outgoings, it's the same thing. A lot of outgoing deadwood, bomb squad, I guess, allowing those players to leave as well, especially, and even some key players, a part of the squad last season and the season before that were going as well. We're going to touch on the three key outgoings: Nani Madueke, Christopher Nkunku, and Keenan Dewsbury Hall. Nani Madueke, through 2 seasons at the club, I think showed some potential. I think his ceiling as a player is probably a bit limited, which is why I think they went ahead and decided that it was time for him to move on. And he lost his place in the Club World Cup over the summer. Wasn't even in the squad for the final because he was sealing his transfer away from the club. So the writing was on the wall in the summer for him, especially with Estevao coming in. He was probably going to lose his place for somebody like that anyway. And they experimented with him on the left to end last season, on the left wing and going into the Club World Cup. So they were making room for a guy like Estevao to come in anyway. So it was probably best for him to move on to a place like Arsenal where he'd be prioritized more. Obviously, the injury to Bukayo Saka means he can play in his natural position on the right. We'll see about him. Keenan Dewsbury Hall, a very good squad player. No complaints on his playing time or anything like that. I'm sure he was frustrated internally about the fact that he was behind in the pecking order. But, it's a good move for him for Everton. Going to Everton, he'll be more of a key highlighted player along with Jack Grealish, who made the move there for a similar reason. So he was a good player for the club, and, no bad things to say on him. The one I'm probably most disappointed on, not because he moved on, but because of how he did for the club, is probably Christopher Nkunku. He was a big money signing. One of those signings from before the direction of the sporting club changed. He was brought in, had a big injury immediately, and clearly the talent is there. He just was unlucky with that injury, and by the time he came back, Cole Palmer came out of nowhere. You know what I'm saying? So it's a shame that he wasn't able to show his true potential and his true talent, because I think he had the talent to be the main man here at Chelsea. So I wish him all the best going to AC Milan. We'll see if he can revive his career a little bit at a club with Milan's stature. I think he has every chance. He's going to have every chance to do so. And in terms of the other outgoings, key sales, I would say, are probably Petrovic, Joao Felix, Renato Vega, and Carney Chukwuemeka are the ones that jump out at me. Petrovic, he hadn't done enough to clearly jump ahead of Rob Sanchez in the pecking order the season before last, and as a result went on loan. And I think, going to Bournemouth for the fee that he went for represents good value for the club. He wasn't the type of keeper, who's probably going to be super world class or anything. So it's an opportunity for him to go be prioritized and be the first choice keeper at a decent Premier League club with decent wages. So, no complaints there. And then, Mike Penders on loan at Strasbourg is probably the eventual successor anyway. So it was probably best for him to move on, if we're all being honest. And, Joao Felix, I mean, that guy has the talent to be, at the top, and it just hasn't panned out at basically every club he's been at since leaving Benfica. So we'll see how Saudi treats him. I think that transfer, it's a dud because, you lose a guy like Conor Gallagher last summer. That was basically a swap deal, if we're being honest. Getting pure profit for Conor Gallagher for PSR reasons, and as a result taking Joao Felix off Atletico Madrid's hands. I think that just was a transfer that benefited both, and I don't think the club was really expecting Joao Felix to come in and really stake a claim in the squad long term. Renato Vega, it's a shame that he didn't seem willing to come back into the club, and I think he probably rubbed the manager and the club the wrong way by the way he left in January, because at first he was brought in for cover for Cucurella at left back, and then realizing that his best path into the national team was center back, obviously, and that's the reason he went all alone to Juve, to get the opportunity to be a center back, because he wasn't going to be that for Chelsea ahead of Levi Colwill. And coming back, it's weird because it's clear that he had an eye on moving out, and then Levi Colwill gets hurt and is out long term for the season. But I guess he just never felt like he was going to be the long term starter ahead of Levi, which is understandable. I mean, Colwill's homegrown. So I guess it makes sense for him to move on. It's a shame because I think he's a really good player, obviously, but probably for the best. And same for Carney Chukwuemeka. He eventually went out on loan to Dortmund and then secured a permanent transfer over the summer, obviously. He has a lot of talent. Now, to what ceiling, I'm not sure, because he's never been available for long enough for both Villa, Chelsea, and now Dortmund to show that. And so hopefully he can just stay healthy, because otherwise he'll never get the opportunity to realize his potential, and we may never see. I'll always remember that goal in the fall not the fall, it was like September or August. I can't remember against who, but that goal under Pochettino where it looked like he was a real talent and really somebody to look out for, and then he gets hurt in the same game. And from there, his availability has almost been non-existent. So I just hope he can get healthy and hopefully have a good career elsewhere. I do want to make a special note for other outgoings. Kepa, he's been contracted by the club for forever. And even though he wasn't ultimately good enough for the level of a Champions League winning club like Chelsea were a few years ago, he took that demotion in stride from when Edouard Mendy came in. And so I'll always admire him for that. And then he did get to live his moment in the Super Cup, helping the club win that penalty shootout against, I think it was Villarreal as well. So, he's going to go be a cup goalkeeper for Arsenal. Benefits both clubs, and just to, wish him all the best. It's a shame that much money was spent on him and he never really lived up to it, but I don't think the fee obviously is never going to be the fault of his own. He just never reached the height that the club was hoping for. And then, obviously Ben Chilwell, for those of you who saw like his goodbye video that he posted on social media and all of that, I'll always remember that 4-0 after versus Juventus in the Champions League group stage, after winning the Champions League, where it looked like where it looked like a push for the league was happening, and then Chilwell gets injured in that game, and he struggles with injuries. For my money, he was one of the best wingbacks in the world, especially in the system that Chelsea played under the Tommy Tuchel. That 3-4-3, him and Reece James were more attacking threats than defensive threats at that point in that system. And, both he and Reece James obviously struggled through injuries and everything. And thankfully, Reece James was able to come back and show the quality that he still had as a player. But Ben Chilwell obviously never reached that level again. He was never really that good under Pochettino when he was healthy for a stretch. And as a result, he's been, a part of the bomb squad, I guess, for the better part of a year now. But, I don't think Pochettino did him any favors. At times he was playing him left wing, if any of you guys recall. And then Levi Cole was the left back. It was such a weird setup, when Chilwell came back to health in that season. But, even when he went on loan to Palace second half of last season, he didn't really, to be fair to him, Tyreek Mitchell was the first choice there and the established first choice and was healthy. And so the opportunity never really came for Chilwell. And hopefully at Strasbourg, I think that was just done as a favor for him to try to go and get game time in a good league at a good and growing side. So I wish him all the best and thank him for his contributions to the club, because obviously there's no Champions League without him being a part of the first 11. As a note, that does leave Reece James as the last remaining member of that squad, which is, a shame, because anybody who's a supporter of the club, that squad they're always going to be fond of those players, even though, guys like Kai Havertz and Mason Mount left on a sour note and aren't very liked by the club and its supporters any longer. Well, let me not say the club, by its supporters any longer. They did contribute and were a part of a team that did something special. So it's a shame that it ended this way for Chilwell, but I wish him all the best, obviously, and hopefully he can revive his career and take the next few years to show the player, or glimpses at least of what he was before injuries took a toll. That happened transfer deadline weekend, so I guess it's a good segue into the shenanigans that happened with Nico Jackson, marquee, and Tyreek George. So it's funny that Nico Jackson was on the way to seal a loan move away to Bayern on the day that Liam Delap gets hurt, and then they recall him. As I said in a previous video, I think it was the match review, the Fulham match review, if I remember correctly. I think it's a good thing that the deal was revived and that he moved on, because he was not going to be happy coming back, and there's no way he wanted to come back after seeing two strikers being brought in and him being put on the back burner, regardless of his talent. And I do think he would have had the opportunity to maybe play on the left as a winger as well. But, once those two were brought in, and then during the Club World Cup, and then he wasn't prioritized, especially after being sent off, I think at that point a move away had to have happened. And I'm glad it did for his sake, and as well as the club's sake. They're going to make a good profit on him, hopefully, if that obligation, based on whatever conditions are, do get triggered. But it's a good opportunity for him. Chelsea do make a good profit. I was against letting him go in the summer and felt like he should have been a part of the squad in this season, just because I think his versatility would have really helped with the team this season. And then I also wasn't the biggest fan of bringing in Alejandro Garnacho, considering we had somebody like Nico Jackson at the club who could have played in his position. But, it is what it is. In terms of marquee, he scored in the cup, I believe, for Sunderland, but it was clear he wasn't the first choice. He didn't start the first couple Premier League matches. And, he'll get an opportunity, I think, to really show and grow as a player for Chelsea. And if he doesn't, being in a better side like Chelsea, I think will help him move to, he can always go back to a team like Sunderland, but if he can come back and show that he belongs with a club like Chelsea, at the very least in a understudy capacity, maybe he gets a move to a club at a higher level eventually. Not to disrespect Sunderland in any way, but, he's coming from a club like Barcelona to a club like Chelsea who, their stature in the world game is a lot higher. So I think he has the talent and definitely the work rate to make an impact as Joao Pedro's understudy for the next few months. And even when Liam Delap comes back, he's not, let's say he misses 2 months, it's probably going to take him up to 3 to try to get back to full fitness, which takes us into the January transfer window. So it's a good opportunity to showcase himself. And, the club really need him because they're thin at striker, obviously, considering Liam Delap's injury. But I think he'll do well if I had to guess. Well, I'm hoping so. Anyway, moving on to Tyreek George. It's a shame for him that he didn't get his move to Fulham. I wish there would have been a way for him to secure a loan move elsewhere. Maybe they would have had something lined up. I'm not sure. But originally there was a fee and a deal agreed for him to move to Fulham for approximately 20 million, 25 million, somewhere in that range. Obviously, it broke down because Harry Wilson, who was at Fulham, didn't seal his move to Leeds for whatever reason. I'm not sure. But as a result, Tyreek George stays at the club. And it's a shame because he's probably third choice left winger, third choice on the right, and then third or fourth choice as a striker. I know he did come on for Liam Delap as a striker against Fulham, but I think after Garnacho has come into the club, I think if there needs to be an emergency striker behind Joao Pedro and marquee for the next few months, it'll probably be Pedro Neto, if I had to say. I think the reason Tyreek George probably came on as striker is because Cole Palmer was hurt. So there wasn't really much room for him to move to that position. But in any case, Tyreek George, I think, hopefully he gets an opportunity, the likes of the Carabao Cup and, lower leverage Champions League games. I doubt he'll make more than 5 appearances from now to the transfer window, if I'm being honest, barring any injuries, just because he was probably on his way out and he's lower on the pecking order to begin with, even before somebody like Garnacho came in. So, he has a lot of talent, and I think he was going to get an opportunity to show that at Fulham. If I had to choose, if I were given the choice over the summer, if you said, hey, you're going to bring in Alejandro Garnacho or give Tyreek George an opportunity, I would have said give Tyreek George an opportunity, just because the money for Garnacho could have been used elsewhere, and Gittins was already brought in from Dortmund over the summer. But that's the downside of the sporting director's strategy. Pure profit for Tyreek George, and then you spread out Garnacho's fee over 5 years and eventually recoup that, or maybe make a profit on it. Who knows? So it's a shame for him, but in any case, I hope he does secure a move away in January for his sake, and is able to kickstart his career in senior football. Now there are a couple of bomb squad players still left at the club, unfortunately. Sterling, David Datro Fofana, and Disasi, to name 3. Sterling, I think his wages were too high and he wanted his specific case. He wanted to stay in London, and I guess there was loan interest from Fulham, and that broke down for whatever reason. They obviously got guys like Chukwueze from Milan and Kevin from Shakhtar. So, and they were looking at Chelsea and decided that they would have preferred Tyreek George if Harry was to move on. So, it looks like he's just going to sit and collect and train and collect his wages until January, maybe secure a move for an injury-riddled team or whatever in London, obviously, which is his hope. And then if not, 2 years left on his deal. I guess this is obviously why the strategy of the sporting directors changed, beating a dead horse with that with that comment. But, a guy like Sterling being still here just because his wages are too high for him to move elsewhere, and him not representing any resale value considering the age that he was purchased from the club. So I hope that he secures a move away. He's kind of really fallen off since he's joined the club, and it's a shame. But I guess that's what happens when you start your career so early and play so many games. I hope that doesn't befall a lot of the young players that Chelsea have acquired, and other players around Europe and the world. So we'll see with him. Datro Fofana, I think he had a couple loan moves secured away to championship clubs, and it just didn't work out for whatever reason. It's a shame for him because he's still young, and he was in Turkey, I believe, last season, and just while he played well when he was available, struggled through injuries. So hopefully he spends this period getting healthy and then secures a move away. The one that I'm a little baffled by is Axel Disasi, because, he's a player who's in his late 20s probably at this point, and had plenty of offers. The likes of West Ham were in for him, Bournemouth as well. Good, decent Premier League clubs. I think maybe even Villa might have had some interest after the loan last season. But, it looks like various factors prevented that deal from happening, whether it was a team like, I'm not sure if Sunderland were in for him or something like that, or West Ham, but I guess those teams, their outlook for this season, I guess he just wanted to go to a team that were predicted to finish higher up in the table. And those clubs also a lot of those clubs weren't willing to meet his wage demands as well. So, I don't know if he's even going to make an appearance for the club from now until the transfer window opens up in January. We'll see about him. I'm not sure, but I feel like he should have taken at least a loan move somewhere and then maybe revisited this conversation in January or next season, because he's in the prime of his career. I don't know. That one really baffles me. And then another quick note for a bomb squad member, Armando Broja. He's officially left the club on a permanent transfer. I remember seeing a video of him, a video of Raheem Sterling, obviously, actually talking about him in some sort of interview where he was asked about, the potential of a player or something like that. If I find it, I'll link it in the description. But he mentioned Armando Broja and telling the person interviewing him that he was the truth. And it looked like he had a lot of potential coming up at Chelsea. I know I was certainly excited to see him play and for the club. And he had a loan to a lower Premier League side. It might have been Southampton, I believe, where he showed some promise. But, a player reliant on athleticism like he was, to go through some injuries like that to begin his career, his senior football career, yeah, it was always going to be difficult from then. And so, as a result, hopefully he can, like a lot of the players that are leaving the club in the summer, hopefully he can get his career back on track, mainly health-wise, just because, you never want to see a player struggle through injuries and not be available to show their potential, because, we watch this game to be entertained by these players. So I wish him the best of luck, of course, as well. And yeah, those are some of my thoughts. I'll probably be back with a Chelsea-specific video on the outlook from the matches through when we come back from the September international break to the October international break. And then maybe another general Premier League video or football video around Europe. So we'll see. If you've come across this video, I appreciate you watching. Leave a like if you would be so inclined, and I appreciate it. Thank you.